On the morning of November the 25th, 2022, a quiet neighborhood in Riverside, California, was shattered by a scene no one could have imagined. A red Kia Soul pulled up to the home of the Wink family on Price Court. Inside that house lived a teenage girl we'll call Sarah, not her real name, her mother Brooke, and her grandparents Mark and Cherie. Sarah and her sister weren't home when the stranger first arrived. He knocked twice that morning, once around 7 a.m. and again closer to 9, then drove away. But he would come back. When he returned, he parked in the driveway of a nearby house and walked toward the front door, flashing a badge. The man was Austin Lee Edwards, a 28-year-old police officer from Virginia. To Sarah's grandmother, he claimed to be a detective working on an investigation involving her granddaughter. Trusting his authority, Cherie let him in. Minutes later, Brooke drove Sarah to the house. Brooke told Sarah to wait in the car while she checked inside. Time passed, nothing seemed to happen, so Sarah finally stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, terror hit. Her grandmother, her grandfather, and her mother lay lifeless on the floor. Before she could even process the sight, Edwards grabbed her by the hair. At first, she didn't recognize him. But as he barked orders at her, the voice gave him away. It was the same man she'd been talking to online, the man who had pretended to be a teenage boy. Within minutes, the home was set ablaze with gasoline, the fire swallowing the evidence of what had just happened. Edwards dragged Sarah outside and forced her into his car. Neighbors watched in shock as the house filled with smoke. By the time fire crews arrived, the Wink family was gone, and Sarah was already on the road, trapped in the passenger seat of the man who had murdered her family. To understand how the nightmare on Price Court unfolded, you have to look at who Austin Lee Edwards really was. Born around 1994, he grew up in Abingdon, Virginia, near the Tennessee border. On the surface, there was nothing extraordinary about him, but cracks appeared early. In February 2016, police were called after his father found him injured in the bathroom. When officers arrived, Edwards was combative, threatening to kill his father and harm himself once freed from restraints. That incident landed him in a secure psychiatric facility in Tennessee. A court later revoked his right to own a firearm, a ruling that should have closed the door on any future in law enforcement. But Edwards had a way of slipping through cracks. In July 2021, he entered the Virginia State Police Academy. By January 2022, he graduated as a state trooper. Somewhere along the line, the system failed to check, or ignored, his mental health history and firearm restrictions. Despite the red flags, he was handed a badge and a gun. At first glance, he looked like the model officer. Behind the scenes, though, Edwards was leading a disturbing double life. Using Instagram and Discord, Edwards pretended to be a 17-year-old boy. That's how he met Sarah in Riverside. Online, he charmed her, showered her with attention and gifts, even paying for food deliveries to her house. He told her he would be turning 18 soon, when in reality he was 28. It was a calculated deception, a web of lies designed to gain her trust. But when Sarah refused to send him intimate photos and eventually blocked him in November 2022, Edwards' obsession turned dark. That same month, he bought a small house in Saltville, Virginia, and just days later was hired by the Washington County Sheriff's Office. Again, no one caught the fact that he wasn't legally allowed to carry a gun. To the outside world, Edwards was a new deputy starting fresh. In reality, he was plotting the trip that would take him across the country to California and straight into the lives of the Wink family. By late November 2022, Edwards was no longer just hiding behind a screen. He had decided to cross a line. He packed up his red Kia Soul and drove across the country from Virginia to California. His destination? Riverside, the neighborhood where Sarah lived with her family. On the morning of November 25th, 2022, Thanksgiving weekend, Edwards arrived at the family's home on Price Court. At first, he circled the neighborhood twice around 7 a.m., as if he was working up the nerve to make his move. By 9 a.m., he parked near the house and approached on foot, wearing his Virginia law enforcement badge and posing as a detective. Sarah's grandmother, Cherie, answered the door. Edwards claimed he needed to speak with Sarah about an ongoing investigation. He looked official, calm, authoritative, carrying himself the way a cop would. Sherry, unsuspecting, contacted Sarah's mother Brooke, who soon drove over with Sarah's younger sister. Brooke dropped her daughters off, then returned with Sarah a short while later. Sarah waited in the car while her mother went inside, but what Sarah walked into moments later was a nightmare. Inside the home, Edwards attacked her without warning, grabbing her by the hair. At first, she didn't recognize who he was. It was only when he barked at her to stop screaming that she recognized his voice. Her world collapsed as she saw her family, her grandparents and mother, lying lifeless on the floor. Edwards had suffocated her grandparents, Mark and Cherie, with plastic bags and stabbed her mother, Brooke, to death. In one horrifying swoop, 3 generations of her family were gone. Then Edwards doused the home in gasoline, setting it ablaze before dragging Sarah out to his car. He told her to stay quiet, that she was his daughter, if anyone asked. What had started as a fake romance online had now exploded into a crime scene that shocked the entire country. With the family home burning behind them, Edwards forced Sarah into his red Kia Soul and sped away from Riverside. It was around 11 a.m. when a neighbour, noticing smoke and a distressed teenager, called 911. Soon after, other neighbours reported the fire. When firefighters entered the home, they discovered the bodies of Mark, Sherry and Brooke. Meanwhile, Edwards was already on the highway, heading east. During the drive, Edwards never let go of Sarah's hand. He told her repeatedly to act as though she was his daughter if anyone asked questions. At one point, she asked him why he killed her family. His response was chilling. If he hadn't, they would have called the police and ruined his escape. It was his way of justifying the unjustifiable. By 1:15 p.m, police identified the suspect vehicle thanks to witness accounts and surveillance cameras. A law enforcement aircraft trailed Edwards from a distance while SWAT units prepared to intercept. The chase finally escalated when officers caught up with him on Highway 62. Edwards opened fire through the rear window of his Kia, riddling a SWAT vehicle with bullets. Moments later, he lost control and veered off the road, crashing beneath a bridge in Kelso, about 180 miles from Riverside. With the car stuck and surrounded, Edwards ordered Sarah out of the vehicle. She scrambled to safety while he stayed behind. In those final moments, faced with capture, Edwards turned his service weapon on himself. The same badge and gun that had allowed him to infiltrate law enforcement were now the tools of his violent end. Sarah, though physically unharmed, had lost nearly everything in a single morning. What began as an online friendship ended in the destruction of her family and the exposure of a predator who had hidden behind a uniform.
Teenager and are not sure how long he'd been communicating with the 15-year-old before traveling across the country and, they believe, committing these murders. Authorities were first alerted when someone saw a girl who seemed distressed getting into his car. Hours later, they spotted the vehicle and a pursuit began that ended with her getting away and Edwards dying in a... Riverside police are now looking into his past and whether he may have targeted other young girls. They're also encouraging parents to talk with their children.